The sound of splintering wood broke through the still Montana air as Zara Marshall stood frozen in place, her wedding dress billowing around her like a cloud of betrayal. The barn where just moments ago she discovered her fiancé in the arms of her cousin was now groaning with an ominous urgency that demanded attention more than her broken heart. Montana Territory, 1875. A day that should have been filled with promise now threatened to be her last. "Hello? Is anyone still in there?" A deep voice called from outside, barely audible over the cracking of wooden beams. Zara tried to respond, but smoke was already filling the loft where she'd fled to hide her tears. The thunderstorm that had been threatening all morning had finally broken, and lightning had apparently struck the old barn. Now flames were racing up the dry timber walls, consuming her escape route down the ladder. "Help!" She finally managed to call out, her voice strangled by both smoke and the remnants of her sobs. "I'm trapped in the loft." The heavy barn doors, already half consumed by flames, burst open. Through the thickening smoke, Zara could make out the silhouette of a man broad-shouldered and determined as he stepped into the inferno. "Up here," she called again, coughing as the smoke burned her lungs. The man looked up, his eyes finding her through the haze. "Jump, I'll catch you." Zara hesitated, clutching the rough wooden railing of the loft. The drop was at least 15 feet, and the flames were closing in from all sides. "There's no time," the stranger shouted. "Trust me." With a prayer on her lips, Zara climbed over the railing and let herself fall, her white dress billowing around her like the wings of a dove. Strong arms caught her with a grunt, and she found herself pressed against a solid chest that smelled of leather, horses, and rain. "Hold on tight," he ordered, already turning toward the door as a massive beam crashed down behind them, sending sparks flying. They burst through the doorway just as the roof gave a final groan and collapsed inward. The force of the implosion sent them sprawling into the mud, the stranger twisting his body to take the brunt of the fall. Rain pelted down on them as Zara caught her breath, staring at the blazing ruin of the barn. Everything the venue for her wedding, the decorations her mother had spent months preparing, and whatever remained of her former life was being reduced to ashes before her eyes. "Are you hurt, madam?" The man's voice drew her attention back to him as he helped her to her feet. For the first time, Zara got a clear look at her rescuer. Piercing blue eyes set in a sun-weathered face regarded her with concern. His dark hair was slicked back from the rain, and a day's worth of stubble shadowed his strong jaw. He wasn't from Twin Pines. She would have remembered a face like his. I think I'm all right," she managed, suddenly aware of how her once pristine wedding dress was now torn, mudded, and singed at the edges. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan, Kieran Callahan." He tipped his head slightly, a gesture that might have accompanied the removal of a hat had he been wearing one. "And you are Zara Marshall." She glanced back at the burning barn. "Or I was supposed to be Zara Thornton by sundown today." Understanding dawned in his eyes as he took in her bedraggled wedding dress. "I take it the ceremony's been postponed." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Permanently, I should think." Kieran Callahan was about to respond when shouts interrupted them. A group of townspeople were running toward them from the direction of the church, led by Zara's father and the very man who had broken her heart less than an hour ago. "Zara," her father called, his face pale with worry. "Good Lord, are you all right?" Before she could answer, Thomas Thornton pushed past her father, his handsome face a mask of calculated concern. "My darling, we've been looking everywhere for you." Zara stepped back, bumping into Kieran, who had remained solidly behind her. "Don't," she said, her voice low but firm. "Don't pretend you care, Thomas." Thomas's eyes darted nervously to the gathered crowd, which now included Zara's mother and several wedding guests. "Zara, sweetheart, you're upset. The wedding jitters have you imagining things. I saw you with Alina." Zara cut him off, her voice stronger now. "In the barn, half an hour before our wedding." A collective gasp went up from the onlookers. Alina, Zara's cousin, who had mysteriously been feeling unwell and missing from the pre-wedding preparations, was nowhere to be seen in the gathered crowd. Thomas's face hardened, the mask of concern slipping. "You're making a scene, Zara." "No, Thomas. You made the scene when you decided to seduce my cousin while I was getting ready to become your wife." Zara felt a strange calm settling over her, as if the fire that had nearly claimed her life had burned away her capacity for hurt and humiliation. Zara's father stepped forward, his normally jovial face now stern as granite. "Is this true, Thornton?" Thomas straightened his suit jacket, his moment of discomfort passing as he shifted into the smooth, talking demeanor that had charmed half the town. "George, your daughter is clearly distraught. The fire, the shock, she doesn't know what she's saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying," Zara insisted. "And what I'm saying is that the wedding is off." With those words, she turned and walked away, head held high despite her ruined dress and the whispers that followed her. She made it about 20 paces before her legs began to tremble, the full weight of everything, the betrayal, the fire, the near-death experience crashing down on her. A strong hand caught her elbow, steadying her. Kieran Callahan had followed, keeping a respectful distance until he saw her falter. "Easy there," he said quietly. "That was quite the performance." "It wasn't a performance," Zara replied, equally quiet. "Though I suppose my life has become something of a spectacle today." "Where are you headed?" he asked. Zara paused, realizing she hadn't thought that far ahead. She couldn't go back to her parents' house, not with all the wedding guests and inevitable questions. The thought of facing anyone right now made her stomach twist. I don't know," she admitted. Kieran studied her for a moment, then glanced back at the crowd that was now breaking up, some heading toward the smoldering remains of the barn, others gathering in small clusters to gossip about the scandal. "I've got a room at the boarding house in town," he offered. "Mrs. Wilkins knows me from my cattle drives through these parts. I can ask her to give you a place to rest and clean up, away from prying eyes." Under normal circumstances, Zara would never consider accepting such an offer from a man she'd just met. But these were hardly normal circumstances, and something about Kieran Callahan's straightforward manner gave her a sense of security she desperately needed. "Thank you," she said simply. "I would appreciate that." Kieran nodded, then whistled sharply. From a copse of trees near the church, a magnificent black stallion trotted over, seemingly unbothered by the commotion. "This is Midnight," Kieran said, patting the horse's neck. "He's steady enough to carry us both to town if you're willing." Zara hesitated, then nodded. Kieran helped her mount, then swung up behind her. As they rode away from the church grounds, Zara couldn't help but feel that she was riding away from one life, and toward another, though what that new life might hold, she couldn't begin to imagine. The town of Twin Pines came into view after a short ride, its main street muddy from the recent rain. A few curious faces peered out from shop windows as they passed, no doubt wondering why the Marshall girl was riding through town on the back of a stranger's horse, wearing a mudded wedding dress, when she should have been saying her vows. Mrs. Wilkins, a plump, no-nonsense widow who ran the town's only boarding house, opened the door before they had even dismounted. Her eyes widened at the sight of Zara, but to her credit, she asked no questions. "Kieran Callahan, what trouble have you brought to my doorstep this time?" she asked, though her tone was more fond than accusatory. "No trouble of my making, Mrs. Wilkins," Kieran replied, helping Zara down from the horse. "Miss Marshall here has had quite the ordeal and needs a place to catch her breath away from curious eyes." Mrs. Wilkins's gaze softened as she took in Zara's appearance more carefully. "Come in, child. I've got hot water for a bath and a spare room where you can rest." Zara followed the older woman into the boarding house, grateful for her discretion. Kieran remained outside, saying he would see to his horse and give them privacy. Mrs. Wilkins led Zara to a modest but clean room on the second floor. "I'll have a bath drawn for you right away. And I might have a dress that'll fit you belong to my daughter before she moved to California." "You're very kind," Zara said, feeling tears well up in her eyes for the first time since the barn collapsed. The simple kindness of strangers after the betrayal of those she had trusted most deeply was overwhelming. Mrs. Wilkins patted her hand. "There'll be time for tears later, dear. For now, let's get you cleaned up." An hour later, Zara sat in Mrs. Wilkins's kitchen, dressed in a simple blue calico dress, her dark hair still damp from the bath. She felt almost human again, though the events of the day still seemed like a bad dream. A knock at the back door announced Kieran's return. Mrs. Wilkins let him in, and he entered the kitchen, looking freshly washed himself, his dark hair still wet at the edges. "Feeling better?" he asked Zara, taking a seat at the table when Mrs. Wilkins gestured for him to do so. "As well as can be expected," Zara replied. "I still haven't thanked you properly for saving my life." Kieran shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same. But they didn't. You did." Zara held his gaze. "Why were you even there?" "The wedding was private family and a few close friends." "I wasn't there for the wedding," Kieran admitted. "I was passing through, saw the smoke from the ridge. By the time I got there, the barn was already going up in flames." Mrs. Wilkins set cups of steaming coffee in front of them. "Kieran's been driving cattle through these parts for years. Has a way with horses that's almost uncanny." "I'm on my way to Wyoming," Kieran explained. "Got a job offer from a rancher there who's expanding his operation." "Wyoming?" Zara couldn't help but feel a strange disappointment. Her rescuer would soon be gone, leaving her to face the aftermath of today's disasters alone. "Mr. Callahan," Mrs. Wilkins said suddenly, "I almost forgot. This telegram came for you yesterday." She pulled a folded paper from her apron pocket and handed it to him. Kieran read it quickly, his expression darkening. "Seems my timing in Wyoming won't matter much. The rancher who offered me the job has had a change of heart." "Oh dear," Mrs. Wilkins clucked sympathetically. "That's a shame." Zara watched as Kieran folded the telegram and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "What will you do now?" she asked. Kieran sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Not sure. Might head to Colorado, try my luck in the silver mines, or California, though the cattle trails there are more crowded these days." The conversation was interrupted by another knock, this one at the front door. Mrs. Wilkins excused herself to answer it. Moments later, she returned with Zara's father in tow. George Marshall looked tired, the lines in his face deeper than they had been that morning. His eyes lit up with relief when he saw his daughter. "Zara, thank God." He crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and enveloped her in a hug. "Your mother and I have been worried sick." Zara stiffened slightly but returned her father's embrace. "I'm fine, Papa. Mr. Callahan made sure of that." George turned to Kieran, extending his hand. "Mr. Callahan, I understand I owe you a debt of gratitude for saving my daughter from that fire." Kieran stood and shook George's hand. "No debt necessary, sir." "Nevertheless," George looked back at Zara. "Your mother is at home, beside herself with worry. Will you come back with me? The guests have all gone, and Thomas has left town." Zara hesitated. The thought of returning home, of facing the emptiness of what should have been the first day of her new life, was daunting. But she couldn't hide in Mrs. Wilkins's boarding house forever. "Of course," she finally said, rising from her chair. "Mrs. Wilkins, thank you for your kindness." "Think nothing of it, dear." The older woman smiled warmly. Zara turned to Kieran, suddenly reluctant to say goodbye to the man who had saved more than just her life today. "Mr. Callahan, Kieran, I don't know how to thank you." "Live well," Kieran said simply. "That's thanks enough." George cleared his throat. "Mr. Callahan, if you don't have pressing business elsewhere, I'd be honored if you'd join us for dinner tonight. It's the least we can do." Kieran looked surprised at the invitation. "That's very kind, sir, but I wouldn't want to impose." "It's no imposition," George insisted. "In fact—" He paused, seeming to consider something. "I have a proposition that might interest you if you're looking for work." Zara felt a flutter of hope. Her father owned one of the largest cattle ranches in the territory. If he was offering Kieran a job— "I'm listening," Kieran said cautiously. "Not here," George said. "Come to dinner, we can discuss it properly then." Kieran glanced at Zara, who nodded encouragingly. "All right," he agreed. "What time should I arrive?" "6 o'clock," George said. "And Mr. Callahan, thank you again for what you did today." As they left the boarding house, Zara couldn't help but wonder what proposition her father had in mind for Kieran Callahan, and why the thought of him staying in Twin Pines made her heart beat just a little faster. The Marshall Ranch sat on 500 acres of prime Montana grassland, with a 2-story white farmhouse that George had built for his wife, Martha, when they first married 23 years ago. As George's carriage pulled up the long drive, Zara felt a mixture of relief and apprehension at returning home. Her mother was waiting on the porch, her normally composed face showing signs of the strain the day had put on her. She rushed down the steps as soon as the carriage stopped. "Zara, my darling girl," Martha exclaimed, embracing her daughter tightly. "When we couldn't find you after the fire, I feared the worst." "I'm fine, Mama," Zara assured her, returning the embrace. "Thanks to Mr. Callahan." Martha stepped back, taking in Zara's borrowed dress and damp hair. "Mrs. Wilkins took good care of you, I see." She turned to George. "And Thomas?" "Gone," George said grimly. "Packed his things and took the afternoon stage to Helena. According to Reverend Phillips, a leaner went with him." Martha's face tightened with anger. That scoundrel and my own niece." "How could they?" "It doesn't matter now," Zara said, surprised at how little the betrayal stung compared to this morning. Near-death experiences had a way of putting things in perspective. "It's over." Martha shook her head, clearly not ready to let it go. "The shame they've brought on both our families. What will people say?" "People will talk for a week, then find something new to gossip about," George said pragmatically. "What matters is that our daughter is safe." He glanced at Zara. "I've invited Mr. Callahan for dinner tonight. I'm considering offering him a position on the ranch." Martha looked surprised but quickly recovered. "Of course, I'll have Hannah prepare something special." She linked her arm through Zara's. "Come inside, dear. You need to rest before dinner." As they entered the house, Zara couldn't help but think about Kieran Callahan and wonder what it would be like to see him regularly around the ranch. The thought brought a warmth to her cheeks that had nothing to do with her recent ordeal. In her bedroom, Zara changed into one of her own dresses, a simple lavender day dress that was a far cry from the elaborate wedding gown she'd worn that morning. She sat at her vanity, brushing her long dark hair, and tried to make sense of the tumultuous day. This morning, she had been preparing to marry a man she thought she loved. Now, that man was exposed as a liar and a cheat. She had nearly died in a fire, and she found herself thinking about a stranger with intense blue eyes and steady hands who had pulled her from the flames. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Her mother entered, carrying a cup of tea. "I thought you might need this," she said, setting the cup on the vanity. "Chamomile with honey." "Thank you, Mama." Zara took a sip, letting the warm liquid soothe her. Martha sat on the edge of the bed, watching her daughter. "You seem calmer than I expected." Zara set down the teacup. "I suppose I am. When I saw Thomas with a leaner, I was devastated. But then the fire happened, and suddenly whether or not Thomas loved me seemed so insignificant." "Nothing about your happiness is insignificant, Zara." Martha reached out to touch her daughter's hand. "But I understand what you mean. Facing death changes one's perspective." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Martha spoke again. "Your father thinks highly of this Mr. Callahan already." "He saved my life," Zara said simply. "Yes, and for that we'll be eternally grateful." Martha hesitated. "But there's something else. Your father mentioned that Mr. Callahan has been driving cattle through the territory for years. Apparently, he has quite a reputation as a horse trainer." Zara raised an eyebrow. "And this matters because your father has been looking for someone to help with the new breeding program he wants to start." Martha smiled knowingly. "The fact that this someone also rescued his only daughter from a burning building is simply fortuitous." Zara felt her cheeks warm again. "Mama, are you playing matchmaker already? The man barely knows me, and my would-be husband just ran off with my cousin this morning." Martha patted Zara's hand. "I'm not suggesting anything of the sort. I'm simply observing that your father has found a practical reason to keep your rescuer nearby, which may give you time to recover from today's events in the presence of someone who isn't connected to all the unpleasantness." Zara couldn't argue with her mother's logic, even if she suspected there was more to it than Martha was letting on. "Well, we'll see what Mr. Callahan thinks of Papa's offer first. He might not even accept it." "We shall see," Martha agreed, rising from the bed. "Rest for a while. Dinner will be ready at 6. After her mother left, Zara moved to the window, looking out over the ranch that had been her home all her life. In the distance, she could see the smoke still rising from what remained of the old barn. A painful reminder, but also a symbol of endings and new beginnings. As the afternoon light began to fade, Zara found herself watching the road that led to their property, waiting for the first glimpse of a lone rider on a black stallion. Kieran Callahan arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, riding up to the Marshall home with the easy confidence of a man who had spent most of his life on horseback. He had changed into a clean shirt and his best pair of trousers, though best was relative when one lived the life of a traveling cowhand. His dark hair was combed back, and he'd trimmed his stubble, revealing a strong jawline that Zara hadn't fully appreciated in the chaos of their first meeting. From her window, Zara watched as her father greeted Kieran at the front door, shaking his hand warmly and ushering him inside. She took a deep breath, checked her appearance one last time in the mirror, and made her way downstairs. The men were in the parlor, her father pouring whiskey into 2 glasses. They both looked up as Zara entered, and Kieran immediately stood, a gesture of respect that seemed natural rather than forced. "Miss Marshall," he said, inclining his head slightly. "You're looking well." "Thank you, Mr. Callahan." Zara smiled, noting the subtle changes in his appearance. "And thank you for accepting my father's invitation." "Your father has been telling me about his ranch," Kieran said, accepting the glass George offered him. "It's quite an operation." "We've been fortunate," George acknowledged. "But I've got plans to expand, particularly in horse breeding." "That's where I'm hoping you might be interested in coming on board, Mr. Callahan." Martha appeared in the doorway. "Dinner is ready," she announced. "Mr. Callahan, welcome to our home." The dining room was simply but elegantly set, with the good china that was usually reserved for special occasions. Zara noticed that her mother had instructed Hannah, their cook, to prepare roast beef with all the trimmings, a meal that would have been served at the wedding reception. As they sat down to eat, George continued outlining his proposition to Kieran. "I've heard from several reliable sources that you have a way with horses that few men possess. Is that true?" Kieran took a sip of water, considering his response. "I wouldn't make such claims about myself, sir, but I've been working with horses since I was a boy. My father was a horse trader in Texas before the war." "And what brought you to Montana?" Martha asked, passing a bowl of mashed potatoes. "Work, mainly. I drove cattle up from Texas after the war, then found I preferred the northern territories. Been working various ranches from Colorado to Montana ever since." Kieran's eyes briefly met Zara's across the table. "Never stayed in one place too long." "Until now, perhaps," George suggested. "I'm looking for someone to head up a breeding program. I've acquired some fine Arabian stock, but I need someone with the right touch to work with them. The position would include a fair salary, room and board, and a share in the profits once the program is established." Kieran set down his fork, clearly considering the offer seriously. "That's generous, Mr. Marshall. But I have to ask, is this offer based on my qualifications, or on what happened today?" George smiled, appreciating the younger man's directness. "Both, if I'm being honest. Your reputation preceded you. Several ranchers I know speak highly of your skills. But yes, the fact that you saved my daughter's life certainly accelerated my decision to approach you." "Papa," Zara interjected, "you never mentioned wanting to start a breeding program before." "I've been considering it for some time," George replied. "With the railroad coming through next year, there will be increased demand for quality horses. It's a good business opportunity." Kieran looked thoughtful. "I'd need to see the horses, understand what you're aiming for with the breeding program." "Of course," George agreed. "We can ride out tomorrow morning, take a look at the stock." The conversation shifted to more general topics as they continued their meal. Zara found herself watching Kieran when he wasn't looking her way, noting the careful way he spoke, the thoughtfulness behind his answers. He wasn't educated in the formal sense, but there was an intelligence in his eyes that suggested he had learned much from life and observation. After dinner, Martha suggested that Zara show Kieran the garden while she and George had coffee in the parlor. It was a transparent attempt to give the young people some time alone, but Zara was grateful for it nonetheless. The evening air was cool but pleasant as they stepped onto the back porch. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and the scent of Martha's prized roses filled the air. "Your parents seem like good people," Kieran said as they walked along the garden path. "They are," Zara agreed, "though I suspect my mother is already hatching plans for us." Kieran raised an eyebrow. "Plans? She tends to see potential matches everywhere," Zara explained, feeling a blush rise in her cheeks. "I hope that doesn't make you uncomfortable." Kieran chuckled, a warm, rich sound. "It takes more than a little matchmaking to make me uncomfortable, Miss Marshall. Please call me Zara." She stopped by a rose bush, touching one of the blooms gently. "After all, you've already seen me at my worst, covered in soot and betrayed on my wedding day." "I wouldn't say that was your worst," Kieran replied, his voice softening. "In fact, the way you stood up to your former fiancé took courage. Not everyone would have the strength to do that in front of the whole town." Zara looked up at him, surprised by his perception. "I didn't feel strong at the time. I felt broken." "Broken things can be mended," Kieran said. "Sometimes they're stronger for having been broken." They stood in silence for a moment, the evening breeze rustling the leaves around them. Zara found herself studying Kieran's profile in the fading light, wondering about the life he had led, the experiences that had shaped him. "Will you accept my father's offer?" she asked finally. Kieran turned to face her fully. "Would you want me to?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. Yes, I think I would." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Then I'll give it serious consideration." They continued their walk around the garden, talking easily about less personal matters, the beauty of the Montana landscape, the changes the railroad would bring to the territory, Kieran's travels across the West. By the time they returned to the house, Zara felt as if she had known him far longer than a single day. George and Martha were still in the parlor when they returned. George rose as they entered. "Mr. Callahan, I've taken the liberty of having a room prepared for you here tonight. It's late, and the ride back to town would be dark." "That's very kind, sir," Kieran said, "but I wouldn't want to impose." "Nonsense," Martha chimed in. "It's the least we can do. Besides, you and George can get an early start tomorrow to look at the horses." Kieran glanced at Zara, who nodded encouragingly. "Then I accept, with thanks." As they said their goodnights and Hannah showed Kieran to the guest room, Zara couldn't help but feel that something significant had shifted in her life. The day that had begun with such promise, then descended into betrayal and danger, was ending with an unexpected sense of possibility. In her bedroom, as she prepared for sleep, Zara found herself drawn to the window once more. The moon was rising over the mountains, casting a silver light over the ranch. Somewhere in the house, Kieran Callahan was settling into the guest room, perhaps considering her father's offer, perhaps thinking of her. For the first time since discovering Thomas's betrayal, Zara felt a flutter of something that might have been hope. Morning brought clear skies and the promise of a warm day. Zara rose early, dressing in a simple riding outfit, a split skirt that allowed her to ride astride, a practical concession her mother had grudgingly accepted years ago, when it became clear that Zara preferred riding like her father rather than side saddle like a proper lady. When she came downstairs, she found her father and Kieran already at the breakfast table, deep in conversation about horse bloodlines and breeding strategies. They both stood as she entered, and Zara was struck again by how natural Kieran's courtesies seemed, unlike Thomas's calculated charm. "Good morning," she greeted them. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," her father assured her. "In fact, I was just telling Mr. Callahan that you might want to join us on our ride this morning. You know those Arabian mares better than anyone." "I'd be happy to," Zara said, taking a seat and accepting the cup of coffee Hannah poured for her. "They're beautiful animals." "Your father tells me you have quite a way with horses yourself," Kieran remarked. Zara smiled, remembering the countless hours she'd spent in the stables as a child, much to her mother's dismay. "I love them. There's something about their spirit, their honesty. They don't pretend to be something they're not." "Unlike some people," George added pointedly, and Zara knew he was thinking of Thomas. After breakfast, they made their way to the stables where the grooms had already saddled 3 horses. Kieran's Midnight was among them, looking majestic next to Zara's chestnut mare Penny. They rode out across the Marshall property, George pointing out various features of the ranch as they went: the creek that provided water year-round, the best grazing lands, the boundaries that separated their property from neighboring ranches. Kieran listened attentively, asking intelligent questions that revealed his knowledge of ranching operations. Finally, they crested a rise and came upon a fenced meadow where several horses grazed peacefully. Even from a distance, the Arabian mares were distinctive, delicate heads, proud carriage, and the flowing manes and tails that were characteristic of the breed. "There they are," George said proudly. 5 purebred Arabian mares, imported at considerable expense from a breeder in Kentucky, who got his stock directly from the Middle East. Kieran dismounted and approached the fence, studying the horses with a professional eye. The mares noticed the newcomers and lifted their heads, ears pricked forward in curiosity. "They're magnificent," Kieran said softly. "What's your plan for them?" "I have a thoroughbred stallion arriving next month," George explained, also dismounting. "I'm hoping to create a line that combines the thoroughbred speed with the Arabian's endurance and intelligence." Zara remained on Penny, watching as Kieran opened the gate and stepped into the meadow. The mares regarded him warily at first, but there was something in his quiet confidence that seemed to reassure them. He made no sudden movements, simply stood still and let them decide whether to approach. After a few moments, the boldest of the mares, a dappled gray that Zara had named Athena, took a step toward Kieran. He remained perfectly still as she approached, stretching her neck to sniff his outstretched hand. "She likes you," Zara observed, finally dismounting and joining them at the fence. "Athena is usually more cautious with strangers. She's curious," Kieran said, gently stroking the mare's neck as she allowed him to touch her. "And intelligent. You can see it in her eyes." George watched with approval as the other mares gradually approached, drawn by Kieran's calm presence. "So, Mr. Callahan, what do you think of my proposition now that you've seen the stock?" Kieran looked around at the beautiful horses, the lush meadow, the sweeping vista of the Marshall ranch with the mountains beyond. His gaze lingered on Zara for a moment before returning to George. "I think you have the makings of something special here, Mr. Marshall," he said finally, "and I'd be honored to be part of it." George's face broke into a wide smile. "Excellent. We can discuss the details back at the house, but I think you'll find my terms more than fair." As they rode back to the main house, Zara found herself stealing glances at Kieran. There was something about the way he sat a horse, the natural ease of his movements, that spoke of a lifetime spent in the saddle. Unlike Thomas, who had always treated horseback riding as a necessary inconvenience of ranch life, Kieran seemed most at home on horseback. Back at the house, George and Kieran sequestered themselves in George's study to hammer out the details of their arrangement. Zara found her mother in the sitting room, embroidering a pillowcase with delicate flowers. "Well," Martha asked, setting aside her needlework, "has your father convinced Mr. Callahan to stay?" "It seems so," Zara replied, taking a seat across from her mother. "They're discussing terms now." Martha nodded approvingly. "He seems like a good man. Quiet, but there's substance to him." "Mama," Zara said warningly, "please don't start planning another wedding. I'm still recovering from the disaster of the first one." "I'm doing no such thing," Martha protested, though her eyes twinkled with amusement. "I'm merely observing that Mr. Callahan appears to be a man of character, unlike some we could mention." Zara couldn't argue with that assessment. In the short time she had known Kieran, he had demonstrated more integrity than Thomas had in the years of their courtship. Still, she was wary of letting her heart be swayed too quickly after such a profound betrayal. "He'll be staying in the foreman's cabin," Martha continued. "Your father had it built when Mr. Johnson was foreman, before he retired last year. It's been sitting empty since then, but Hannah and I will make sure it's properly furnished for Mr. Callahan." The foreman's cabin was a small but well-built structure about a quarter-mile from the main house, close enough for convenience, but far enough for privacy. The thought of Kieran living so near sent a strange flutter through Zara's stomach. Later that afternoon, George emerged from his study looking pleased, Kieran beside him. "It's settled," George announced to Zara and Martha. "Mr. Callahan will be joining us as our new horse master, effective immediately." "Welcome to the Marshall Ranch, Mr. Callahan," Martha said warmly. "We're delighted to have you." "Thank you, Mrs. Marshall," Kieran replied. "Your husband has been very generous." "Nonsense," George waved away the comment. "I'm getting the better end of the deal, securing a horseman of your caliber." He turned to Zara. "Perhaps you could show Mr. Callahan to the foreman's cabin. Make sure everything is in order." "Of course," Zara agreed, rising from her seat. "I'd be happy to." Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows as Zara led Kieran along the path to the cabin. They walked in companionable silence for a few minutes before Kieran spoke. "Your father is a good man," he said. "Not many ranch owners would offer terms as fair as his to someone they just met." "Papa has always been a good judge of character," Zara replied. "And after what you did yesterday, well, our family owes you a debt that can never truly be repaid." Kieran stopped walking, turning to face her. "You don't owe me anything, Zara. Saving you from that fire was. It was just human decency." "Nevertheless," she insisted, "if you hadn't been there, hadn't acted when you did." She shuddered at the thought of what might have happened. Kieran's expression softened. "But I was there and you're safe. That's what matters." After a moment he added, "Though I have to admit, I never expected that responding to a fire would lead to a new job and new acquaintances." There was something in the way he said acquaintances that made Zara wonder if he, too, felt the strange connection that had formed between them in such a short time. They continued walking, and soon the foreman's cabin came into view. It was a sturdy log structure with a small porch set against a backdrop of pine trees. Smoke rose from the chimney, indicating that Hannah or one of the other house servants had already been there to light a fire. "It's not fancy," Zara said as they approached, "but it's comfortable. Mr. Johnson always said it was the best place on the ranch to watch the sunrise." Inside, the cabin was simple but well appointed: a main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, a bedroom off to one side, and a washroom at the back. Someone, likely Martha, had placed a vase of fresh wildflowers on the table, and the bed was made up with clean linens. "This is more than comfortable," Kieran said, looking around appreciatively. "It's luxurious compared to some of the places I've stayed." Zara smiled, trying to imagine the rough bunkhouses and trail camps that had been Kieran's homes over the years. "Well, I hope you'll be happy here." "I think I will be," he replied, his blue eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "For the first time in a long while, I think I might have found a place worth staying." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then, remembering herself, Zara took a step back. "I should get back to the house. Mama will be wondering where I've gotten to." Kieran nodded, though she thought she saw a flash of disappointment cross his face. "Of course, and I should probably start bringing my things from town." "Papa will send one of the hands with a wagon," Zara assured him. "You can make a list of what you need and they'll fetch it from Mrs. Wilkins's boarding house." "I travel light," Kieran said with a slight smile. "Won't take more than one trip." As Zara turned to leave, she paused at the door. "Dinner is at 6 at the main house. Papa will expect you to join us." "I'll be there," Kieran promised. Walking back to the house, Zara found herself smiling for no particular reason. The events of the previous day, Thomas's betrayal, the fire, her narrow escape seemed to be receding like a bad dream, replaced by a curious sense of anticipation for what might lie ahead. The weeks that followed settled into a new rhythm at the Marshall Ranch. Kieran proved himself to be everything George had hoped for in a horse master: knowledgeable, dedicated, and possessed of an almost supernatural ability to communicate with the horses in his care. The Arabian mares responded to him as if they'd known him all their lives, and when the thoroughbred stallion arrived, a magnificent bay named Emperor, Kieran spent days working with him, establishing trust and respect, before introducing him to the mares. Zara found herself spending more time at the stables and paddocks than she had in years, ostensibly to learn from Kieran's methods, but increasingly because she enjoyed his company. Unlike Thomas, who had always directed conversation back to himself, Kieran was a good listener. He asked thoughtful questions about her life, her interests, her dreams, and seemed genuinely interested in her answers. They often rode out together in the early mornings, exploring the far reaches of the Marshall property. During these rides, Kieran gradually shared more of his own story, his childhood in Texas, losing his father in the war, the years of drifting from job to job across the Western territories. He spoke without self-pity about the hardships he had faced, and with quiet pride about the skills he had developed along the way. One crisp morning in late September, they rode to a high meadow that offered a panoramic view of the valley below. The first hints of autumn were touching the aspen trees with gold, and the air held that particular clarity that comes with the changing seasons. They dismounted to let the horses graze, and Zara spread a small blanket on the grass where they could sit and enjoy the view. From a saddlebag, she produced a thermos of coffee and some of Hannah's oatmeal cookies. "You came prepared," Kieran observed, accepting the cup of coffee she poured for him. "I thought we might stay a while," Zara admitted. "It's one of my favorite spots on the ranch, especially this time of year." They sat in comfortable silence for a time, sipping their coffee and watching as the morning mist burned off the valley below. Zara was acutely aware of Kieran beside her, the warmth of his presence, the faint scent of leather and horses that always seemed to cling to him. "You know," Kieran said eventually, "when I pulled you from that barn, I never imagined I'd still be here weeks later." Zara glanced at him. "Do you regret staying?" "Not for a moment," he replied without hesitation. "Your father has been more than fair, the work is rewarding, and—" He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "And I've enjoyed getting to know you, Zara." The simple statement sent a rush of warmth through her. "I've enjoyed getting to know you too, Kieran." He turned to face her fully, his blue eyes serious. "I know it hasn't been long since what happened with Thomas, and I understand if you're not ready to think about courting again." Zara's heart quickened at his words. "Are you asking to court me, Kieran Callahan?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I suppose I am, in my clumsy way. Your father gave me permission last week, but he advised me to give you time." "Papa knows." Zara was surprised, though perhaps she shouldn't have been. George Marshall didn't miss much, especially when it came to his only daughter. "I wanted to do things properly," Kieran explained. "After what happened with Thomas, I thought, well, I wanted to be clear about my intentions." Zara considered his words. It had been just over a month since her wedding day disaster, but in that time, she had come to know Kieran better than she had ever known Thomas in years of courtship. There was a steadiness to Kieran, an honesty that made her feel safe in a way she never had before. "I think," she said slowly, "that sometimes the heart knows what it wants, regardless of how much time has passed." Hope flickered in Kieran's eyes. "And what does your heart want, Zara?" Instead of answering with words, Zara leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to his lips. It was brief, but in that moment of connection, she felt something slot into place, as if a missing piece of herself had been found. When she pulled back, Kieran was looking at her with a mixture of surprise and wonder. "I take it that's a yes," Zara laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Yes, Kieran Callahan, I would be honored to be courted by you." His smile was like the sunrise, warming her from the inside out. Tentatively, he reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. They sat like that for a long time, watching the valley below, their future stretching before them like the vast Montana sky. Word spread quickly through Twin Pines that Zara Marshall was being courted by the mysterious Cowboy, who had saved her from the burning barn. The town gossips, who had feasted for weeks on the scandal of her abandoned wedding, now turned their attention to this new development. Some, like old Mrs. Beaumont, who ran the general store, thought it was too soon after the broken engagement. "Hardly decent," she muttered to anyone who would listen. "The girl should be in mourning for at least 6 months." Others, like Reverend Phillips, who had witnessed Thomas's character firsthand, were more supportive. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he told Martha Marshall after Sunday services. "Perhaps this young man is the blessing that came from that terrible day." Zara and Kieran paid little attention to the gossip. Their courtship progressed with a natural ease that surprised them both. In the evenings, after dinner with George and Martha, they would often sit on the porch, talking until the stars came out. On Sundays, they attended church together, then joined other young couples for picnics by the river or socials at the town hall. As autumn deepened, bringing cooler days and frost-touched mornings, their feelings for each other grew stronger. Kieran proved to be a thoughtful suitor, bringing Zara wildflowers he found on his rides, or small wooden carvings he crafted in the evenings, a horse, a bird, once a delicate rose that must have taken hours to complete. One crisp October afternoon, Zara was helping Hannah in the kitchen when they heard the sound of galloping hooves approaching the house. Moments later, the back door burst open, and one of the ranch hands, young Billy Thompson, rushed in, his face flushed with excitement. "Miss Zara, you've got to come quick. Mr. Callahan's working with that wild mustang they brought in yesterday, and it's something to see." Zara wiped her hands on her apron. "The black stallion, the one they found in the north pasture," Billy nodded enthusiastically. "That's the one. Nobody could get near him, but Mr. Callahan's in the corral with him now. And it's like nothing I ever saw." Curious, Zara followed Billy out to the training corral near the stables. A small crowd of ranch hands had gathered, watching in fascination as Kieran stood in the center of the enclosure, facing a magnificent black mustang that was regarding him with wary suspicion. The horse was clearly wild, its coat dull from life on the range, its mane tangled, its eyes fierce with the freedom of the open plains. It circled Kieran cautiously, nostrils flared, muscles tense and ready to bolt. Kieran stood perfectly still, his posture relaxed but alert. He was speaking to the horse, his voice too low for Zara to make out the words, but the tone was gentle, reassuring. In his hand he held a simple rope halter, but he made no move to approach the mustang with it. For what seemed like an eternity, nothing happened. The mustang continued to circle, occasionally stopping to paw at the ground or toss its head. Kieran remained motionless, patient, his eyes never leaving the horse. Then, almost imperceptibly, the dynamic began to shift. The mustang's circles grew smaller, its stops more frequent. It would pause, sniff the air in Kieran's direction, then resume its pacing but with less agitation than before. Zara held her breath as the horse finally stopped directly in front of Kieran, its head high, ears pricked forward. Kieran slowly, very slowly, extended his hand, palm up. The mustang snorted, took a step back, then to the amazement of everyone watching stretched its neck forward to sniff Kieran's hand. A collective murmur ran through the onlookers. Zara felt a swell of pride and something deeper, something that made her heart race and her cheeks flush. Watching Kieran with the mustang, his patience, his gentleness combined with quiet strength, she realized with sudden clarity that she was falling in love with him. The thought should have frightened her after the disaster with Thomas, but instead, it felt right, as natural as breathing. This was nothing like the giddy infatuation she had felt for Thomas. This was deeper, steadier, built on a foundation of respect and genuine knowing. The sound of applause broke her reverie. The Mustang had allowed Kieran to slip the halter over its head and was now standing quietly beside him, still wary but no longer afraid. The ranch hands were clapping and calling out congratulations. Kieran looked up, his eyes finding Zara in the crowd. The smile he gave her was filled with a joy that came from doing what he loved best and sharing that moment with her. She smiled back, hoping he could read in her expression the realization that had just dawned on her. Later that evening, after dinner, they walked to the small pond behind the orchard, a favorite spot where they often watched the sunset. The air was cool enough now that Zara wore a shawl over her dress, and Kieran had draped his jacket around her shoulders when she shivered. "What you did with that Mustang today was incredible," Zara said as they stood by the water's edge, watching the last rays of sunlight glint off the surface. "I've never seen anything like it." Kieran smiled, a touch of modesty in his expression. "It's not so different from working with people, really. You have to earn trust before you can expect cooperation." "Is that what you did with me?" Zara asked teasingly. "Earn my trust like a wild horse," he laughed, the sound warm in the gathering dusk. "You weren't nearly as skittish as that Mustang. Besides, I think you were the one who tamed me, Zara Marshall." "Did you need taming?" She turned to face him, curious. Kieran's expression grew thoughtful. "Maybe not taming exactly, but I needed a reason to stop wandering. A reason to stay in one place." His gaze held hers steadily. "You gave me that reason." The simple honesty of his words touched her deeply. "I'm glad you stayed, Kieran. So am I." He took her hands in his touch warm despite the cool evening air. "Zara, there's something I need to tell you." Her heart quickened at his serious tone. "What is it?" "I've received a letter from a rancher in Wyoming, the same one who rescinded his job offer the day we met. He's heard about the work I'm doing here with your father's breeding program, and he's made another offer. A very generous one." Zara felt as if the ground had suddenly shifted beneath her feet. You're leaving?" "No," Kieran said firmly, squeezing her hands. "That's what I want to tell you. I wrote back and declined the offer." Relief washed over her, followed quickly by confusion. "But why, if it was generous?" "Because my home is here now," he said simply. "With the horses, with your family." He paused, his blue eyes intense in the fading light. "With you, Zara, if you'll have me." The world seemed to still around them as Zara realized what he was saying. "Kieran, are you?" He released her hands, only to reach into his pocket and pull out a small object. When he opened his palm, Zara saw a ring, a simple gold band with a small, perfect sapphire that caught the last light of day. "I know it hasn't been long," Kieran said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "And I know proper courtships are supposed to last much longer. But when I pulled you from that barn, something changed for me. It was like finding something I didn't even know I was looking for." He took a deep breath, then went down on one knee before her. "Zara Marshall, I love you. I love your strength, your kindness, your spirit. I can't offer you wealth or a grand house, but I can promise to cherish you, to be faithful to you, and to build a life with you that's filled with joy. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred Zara's vision as she looked down at this man who had literally walked through fire to save her, who had shown her what real love looked like in the quiet moments of everyday life. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Kieran Callahan, I will marry you." His face lit up with a joy that mirrored her own as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he was on his feet, gathering her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that made her feel both cherished and desired. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "I have your father's blessing," he assured her. "I spoke with him yesterday." Zara laughed softly. "Of course you did. always doing things properly. I want to do right by you always, he said seriously. No secrets, no hidden agendas, just honest love for all our days. As twilight deepened around them, they walked back to the house hand in hand, the small sapphire on Zara's finger catching the light of the rising moon. The future stretched before them, full of promise, a future neither of them could have imagined on that fateful day when smoke rose from an old barn and destiny stepped in to change their lives forever. The news of Zara and Kieran's engagement spread through Twin Pines like wildfire. Most of the town was delighted for them. The romantic story of the brave cowboy who had rescued the jilted bride, only to win her heart, was too perfect not to embrace. Even Mrs. Beaumont grudgingly admitted that they made a handsome couple, though she still thought the engagement was indecently hasty. Martha Marshall, who had secretly been hoping for just this outcome since the day Kieran pulled Zara from the burning barn, threw herself into planning a wedding that would erase the memory of the disastrous, almost wedding with Thomas. This time, however, she made sure to consult Zara at every step, determined that her daughter's wishes would be paramount. Nothing too elaborate, Zara insisted as they sat in the parlor one afternoon, looking through fabric samples for her wedding dress. I don't want anything like the last one. Martha nodded, understanding. Something simple but elegant then, and perhaps we should avoid having the ceremony in a barn, she added with a wry smile. Zara laughed, surprised that they could joke about it now. Definitely no barns. I was thinking the garden might be nice if the weather holds. Or the church if it doesn't. The garden would be lovely, Martha agreed. We could set up an arbor where the rose trellis is, with ribbons and flowers. Her eyes took on the dreamy look she got when envisioning decorations. Just don't go overboard, Mama, Zara cautioned, though she smiled as she said it. Her mother's enthusiasm was touching, especially given how devastated Martha had been after the disaster with Thomas. Of course not, dear, Martha promised, though they both knew she would likely do exactly that. Now, what about the guest list? Small and intimate, I assume. While Zara and her mother planned, Kieran was busy with projects of his own. George had given the couple a wedding gift of 5 acres on the eastern edge of the ranch property, a beautiful piece of land that overlooked a small stream and had a stand of cottonwood trees for shade in summer. Build a home there, George had told Kieran. A place for you and Zara to start your life together. With typical efficiency, Kieran had already begun clearing the site and ordering lumber. Several of the ranch hands volunteered to help with the construction, grateful for the chance to repay the man who had taught them so much about horses in the months since his arrival. The house would be modest to start: 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a sitting room, and a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. But Kieran had designed it with expansion in mind, planning for the family they hoped to have someday. One evening in early November, after a long day of work on the house foundation, Kieran joined the Marshalls for dinner as usual. He looked tired but satisfied, the kind of weariness that comes from meaningful labor. "How's the building coming along?" George asked as they sat at the table. "Well, sir," Kieran replied, "we got the foundation laid today. Should start on the framing tomorrow, weather permitting." "You'll have a roof on before the first snow at this rate," George observed approvingly. Zara smiled across the table at Kieran, loving the quiet pride she saw in his eyes. This was a man who built things to last: relationships, homes, futures. So different from Thomas, who had always been looking for the quickest, easiest path to what he wanted. "Speaking of weather," Martha interjected, "we should probably set a date for the wedding soon. November can be unpredictable, and if we want to have it in the garden." "How about the last Saturday of the month?" Zara suggested. That gives us 3 weeks to prepare, and it's before the weather usually turns truly cold. Kieran nodded. That sounds perfect to me. The house won't be completely finished by then, but we'll at least have walls and a roof. And you can stay in the foreman's cabin until the house is ready, George added. No need to rush the finishing touches. It was settled then. November 25, 1875, just 3 days after Thanksgiving would be their wedding day. As Kieran rode back to his cabin that night, Zara walked with him part of the way, their hands linked, their conversation filled with plans and dreams for their future together. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a flurry of activity. While Martha orchestrated the preparations for the ceremony and reception, Kieran and his volunteer crew worked tirelessly on the house. Zara divided her time between helping her mother and bringing meals to the construction site, where she would often stay to watch the progress, marveling at how quickly their home was taking shape. True to his word, Kieran had the roof on before the first snow fell, a light dusting in mid-November that melted by noon, but served as a reminder that winter was approaching. By the week of the wedding, the house had windows, doors, and even a stone fireplace that Kieran had insisted on building himself. It's the heart of a home, he explained to Zara as they stood in what would be their sitting room, admiring his handiwork. Especially in Montana winters. 2 days before the wedding, Zara was in her bedroom at the main house, trying on her wedding dress for final adjustments. Unlike the elaborate confection of lace and pearls she had worn for her wedding to Thomas, this dress was elegantly simple ivory silk with delicate embroidery at the bodice and cuffs, a modest train, and a veil of fine tulle that Martha had ordered from a shop in Helena. "You look beautiful," Martha said softly, watching as Hannah pinned the hem. "Like a true bride should look." Zara smiled at her mother's reflection in the mirror. "Thank you, Mama, for everything." Martha's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I just want you to be happy, my darling. And I can see that Kieran makes you happy in a way that Thomas never did." It was the first time either of them had spoken Thomas's name in weeks. The wound of his betrayal had healed faster than Zara would have thought possible, sealed by the genuine love she had found with Kieran. "He does make me happy," Zara confirmed. "More than I knew was possible." Martha nodded, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Your father and I are so proud of you, Zara. You've handled everything with such grace, the scandal, the gossip, all of it, and now you're building a beautiful new life." Zara stepped carefully off the stool where she had been standing, mindful of Hannah's pins, and embraced her mother. "I've had good examples to follow," she said. "You and Papa have shown me what a true partnership looks like." The moment was interrupted by a commotion downstairs, the sound of the front door opening, voices raised in greeting, and then her father calling up the stairs. "Martha, Zara, come down and see who's here." Exchanging curious glances, they helped Zara out of her wedding dress and into a day dress before descending to the foyer. There, standing beside George with a travel-worn appearance but a bright smile, was Zara's older brother William, who had been working as a surveyor for the railroad in Colorado for the past 2 years. "Will," Zara exclaimed, rushing forward to embrace her brother. "What are you doing here?" "We weren't expecting you until tomorrow," William laughed, returning her hug with enthusiasm. "Caught an earlier stage than I expected. Couldn't miss my little sister's wedding, could I? Especially not after missing all the excitement of the non-wedding." Zara pulled back, swatting his arm playfully. "Don't tease, Will. It was hardly exciting at the time." "I know, Zara girl, I'm sorry." His expression sobered. "I should have been here, might have knocked some sense into that scoundrel before he could hurt you." "It all worked out for the best," Zara assured him. "Wait until you meet Kieran. You're going to like him, I promise. If he makes you smile like that, I already do, William said, giving her another quick hug before turning to embrace his mother. That evening, Kieran joined them for dinner as usual, meeting William for the first time. The two men sized each other up briefly before shaking hands with firm grips that suggested mutual respect. "So you're the cowboy who pulled my sister from a burning building," William said as they sat down to eat, "and then had the good sense to fall in love with her." Kieran smiled, his eyes finding Zara's across the table. "Best decision I ever made." "Will's been helping survey the route for the Northern Pacific Railroad," George explained to Kieran. "He's got quite an eye for landscape and topography." "It's fascinating work," William agreed. "Helping to connect the country, opening up new territories for settlement and commerce." The conversation flowed easily throughout dinner, with William sharing stories of his adventures in Colorado and Kieran describing the progress on the house. By the time dessert was served, it was clear that William approved of his sister's choice. "He's solid," William told Zara later when they had a moment alone on the porch. "Not flashy like Thomas, but real, the kind of man who means what he says and does what he promises." "That's exactly who he is," Zara agreed, grateful for her brother's assessment. William had always been a good judge of character, which was why his approval meant so much to her. The day before the wedding dawned clear and surprisingly mild for late November. The garden, though past its summer glory, had been transformed by Martha's careful planning. The rose trellis was draped with ribbons and late-blooming chrysanthemums. Rows of chairs were set up facing an elegant arch where Reverend Phillips would perform the ceremony, and lanterns were hung from the trees to provide light as the early winter dusk fell. While the final preparations were underway at the main house, Kieran was at their new home, working on one last surprise for Zara. With William's help, he had constructed a swing on the front porch, a wide, comfortable seat suspended by ropes from the porch ceiling, facing west to catch the sunset. "She used to love the old swing at our grandparents' house in Virginia," William explained as they worked. "Would sit there for hours, reading or just watching the world go by." "I want her to feel at home here from the first day," Kieran said, testing the swing's sturdiness. "Like this place was built just for her, because it was." William clapped Kieran on the shoulder. "You're a good man, Callahan. I'm glad my sister found you." That evening, the Marshall house was filled with out-of-town guests who had arrived for the wedding. Martha's sister and her husband from Denver, cousins from as far away as St. Louis, and several of George's business associates and their wives. A rehearsal dinner was held in the dining room, with Hannah and two hired girls serving a feast that showcased the best of Montana's bounty. Following tradition, Kieran would spend his last night as a bachelor in the foreman's cabin, while Zara remained at her parents' house. After the dinner, as guests began to retire to their rooms or to accommodations in town, Kieran and Zara slipped away for a few private moments in the garden where they would be married the next day. The night was clear, stars brilliant in the black Montana sky, a crescent moon providing just enough light to see by. They walked hand in hand to the arch where they would exchange their vows. "This time tomorrow, you'll be Mrs. Callahan," Kieran said, his voice low and intimate in the darkness. "It has a nice ring to it," Zara replied, leaning against him. "Zara Callahan." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood together, looking out at the garden that would be the setting for their new beginning. "Are you nervous?" he asked. Zara considered the question honestly. "Not about marrying you," she said. "Just a little anxious that something might go wrong again." "Nothing will go wrong," Kieran assured her, turning her to face him. "But even if it did, if it rained or snowed, if the cake collapsed, if the Reverend forgot his Bible, none of that would matter." All that matters is that at the end of the day, we'll be husband and wife." Zara reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "How did I get so lucky, Kieran Callahan?" "I'm the lucky one," he insisted, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "And I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." Their kiss was tender, full of promise and anticipation for the life they would begin together tomorrow. When they finally parted, Kieran walked Zara back to the house, leaving her at the door with one last kiss. "Until tomorrow, my love," he said, his blue eyes bright even in the dim light from the hallway. "Until tomorrow," she echoed, watching as he walked away toward his cabin, his tall figure soon swallowed by the darkness. Inside, the house was quiet, most of the guests having retired. Zara made her way upstairs to her bedroom, her heart full. As she prepared for bed, she found herself thinking of how differently she felt compared to the night before her wedding to Thomas. Then, she had been excited but also nervous, with a small voice of doubt in the back of her mind that she had ruthlessly silenced. Tonight, there was no doubt, no voice of warning. Only certainty, peace, and a deep, abiding joy at the thought of building a life with Kieran Callahan, the man who had rescued her in more ways than one. Wedding day dawned with perfect late autumn weather, clear skies, mild temperatures, and just enough breeze to make the ribbons on the garden arch flutter gently. Zara woke early, lying in her childhood bed for a few moments, savoring the knowledge that by nightfall she would be in a new home with her husband. Martha bustled in shortly after, already dressed and clearly excited. "It's going to be a beautiful day, Zara. The garden looks magical, and Hannah has outdone herself with the wedding breakfast." The morning passed in a whirl of activity, a special breakfast with family, then the ritual of preparing the bride. Zara's Aunt Clara and two cousins helped with her hair, arranging it in an elegant updo with soft curls framing her face. Martha carefully applied a touch of rice powder and a hint of rouge to Zara's cheeks, then stepped back to admire the effect. "You're glowing," she said softly. And not because of any powder or rouge. It was true. Zara felt a happiness that radiated from within, a joy that no cosmetic could replicate. When it was time to don her wedding dress, she stood still as Hannah and her aunt eased it over her head, careful not to disturb her hair. The ivory silk settled around her like a cloud, the bodice fitting perfectly thanks to Hannah's skilled needlework. Martha fastened the pearl buttons up the back, then placed the veil on Zara's head, securing it with pearl-tipped pins. "There," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "My beautiful girl." A knock at the door announced William, who had come to escort his sister to the garden. He stopped in the doorway, his expression softening as he took in the sight of Zara in her wedding finery. "You look like an angel, Zara girl," he said, offering his arm. "Ready to make an honest man of your cowboy." Zara took a deep breath, nodded, and placed her hand on her brother's arm. "More than ready." Downstairs, guests were already seated in the garden, a gathering of about 50 friends and family members who had come to witness the union of Zara Marshall and Kieran Callahan. A string quartet from Helena played softly as William led Zara through the house and out onto the back porch. At the far end of the garden, beneath the flower-draped arch, stood Kieran, looking more handsome than Zara had ever seen him in a new black suit. His dark hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. Beside him was George, serving as his best man, a gesture that had touched Kieran deeply when George had offered. As the quartet began the wedding march, all heads turned to watch Zara's approach. She walked slowly beside William, her eyes fixed on Kieran, barely noticing the admiring murmurs from the guests. All she could see was the love and wonder in Kieran's eyes as he watched her come toward him. When they reached the arch, William placed Zara's hand in Kieran's, then stepped back to join their mother in the front row. Reverend Phillips smiled at the young couple before beginning the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God and this company to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The words of the familiar service washed over Zara as she stood hand in hand with Kieran, her heart so full it felt it might burst. When it came time for their vows, Kieran's voice was clear and strong, his promises to love, honor, and cherish her ringing with sincerity. When it was her turn, Zara spoke the traditional words with equal conviction, her voice steady despite the tears of joy that threatened. The exchange of rings followed a simple gold band for Kieran, and for Zara, a delicate band that matched her sapphire engagement ring. "By the power vested in me by God and the territory of Montana, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Phillips declared. With a warm smile, he added, "Mr. Callahan, you may kiss your bride." Kieran lifted Zara's veil gently, his blue eyes alight with love as he bent to claim her lips in a kiss that was both tender and reverent. The assembled guests burst into applause, and as they turned to face their friends and family for the first time as husband and wife, Zara felt a profound sense of rightness, of having finally found where she truly belonged. The reception that followed was everything the first non-wedding reception should have been: joyous, relaxed, and filled with genuine good wishes for the couple. Tables were set up on the lawn, laden with food prepared by Hannah and her helpers. A small dance floor had been constructed near the quartet, and as the afternoon progressed, couples took to it with enthusiasm. Kieran and Zara had their first dance to a waltz that Martha had specially requested, moving together with a natural grace that spoke of their deepening connection. As other couples joined them, George claimed a dance with his daughter while Martha partnered with Kieran. "You've made her happier than I've ever seen her," George told Zara as they circled the floor. "And for that, son-in-law or not, you'll always have my gratitude." "He's a remarkable man, Papa," Zara replied, watching as Kieran guided her mother through the steps of the waltz with careful attention. "I think I loved him from the moment he pulled me from that fire." "Sometimes the heart knows what it wants right away," George said with a knowing smile. "It was that way with your mother and me. One look and I was done for." As the afternoon waned and twilight approached, Kieran sought out his bride, who was chatting with cousins near the punch bowl. "Are you ready to see our home, Mrs. Callahan?" he asked, offering his arm. Zara's face lit up at the new title. "I thought you'd never ask, Mr. Callahan." They made their farewells amid good-natured teasing and a shower of rice, then climbed into the buggy that William had decorated with ribbons and flowers. Kieran took the reins, and they set off down the lane that led to their new home, leaving the sounds of the reception behind. The short journey gave Zara time to absorb the reality that she was now a married woman, a wife heading to the home she would share with her husband. The thought brought a warm flush to her cheeks and a flutter to her stomach that was equal parts nervousness and anticipation. As they rounded the final bend in the lane, their house came into view, warm light spilling from the windows into the gathering dusk. Kieran had left lanterns burning inside before the ceremony, wanting Zara's first sight of their home as a married couple to be welcoming. He drew the buggy to a stop before the front porch, then turned to Zara with a smile that made her heart skip. "Welcome home, Mrs. Callahan." Before she could respond, he was out of the buggy and coming around to her side, lifting her down with strong, gentle hands. But instead of setting her on her feet, he swept her into his arms. "Kieran," Zara laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "What are you doing?" "Carrying my bride across the threshold," he replied, mounting the steps to the porch. "It's tradition." At the door he paused, looking down at her with such tenderness that Zara felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you, Zara Callahan," he said softly, "more than I have words to express." "I love you too, Kieran," she whispered back. "With all that I am." He pushed the door open with his foot and carried her inside, into the home they would fill with love and laughter and, God willing, children someday. As he set her gently on her feet in their sitting room, Zara looked around, taking in the simple but beautiful furnishings that Martha had helped select, the cheerful fire burning in the stone hearth, and the fresh flowers on the table, all touches that made the house immediately feel like home. "It's perfect," she breathed, turning in a slow circle. "Absolutely perfect." "There's one more thing," Kieran said, taking her hand and leading her back outside to the porch. There, facing the setting sun, was the swing he had built with William's help. "Your brother told me how much you loved your grandparents' porch swing." Zara's eyes filled with tears at the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "Oh, Kieran, it's wonderful." He led her to the swing and they sat together, Kieran's arm around her shoulders, Zara's head resting against him as they watched the sun sink below the horizon in a blaze of gold and crimson. The first stars were just beginning to appear in the deepening blue of the eastern sky. "Happy?" Kieran asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Completely," Zara assured him, turning her face up to meet his lips with hers. The kiss deepened, filled with the promise of the night ahead and all the days and nights to come. As darkness settled around their new home, Kieran and Zara Callahan began their life together, bound by a love that had been forged in fire and tempered by truth, a love that would endure through all the seasons of their lives. 10 years later, Zara Callahan stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Kieran taught their eldest son, 7-year-old James, how to gentle a young colt. The same patience and quiet strength that had first drawn her to Kieran were evident in the way he guided their son, offering advice but allowing the boy to find his own way with the nervous animal. Beside her on the porch swing sat 5-year-old Mary, her dark hair in braids, intently working on a small piece of embroidery that her grandmother Martha had started her on. At Zara's feet, 2-year-old George played with wooden blocks, occasionally looking up to make sure his mother was still there. The Marshall Callahan horse breeding program had flourished over the decade, becoming known throughout the territory and beyond for producing animals of exceptional quality and temperament. The modest 5 acres George had given them as a wedding gift had expanded to 50, with paddocks, a training ring, and a barn far more substantial than the one that had burned on Zara's almost wedding day. Kieran had a natural gift not just for horses, but for business as well, and under his guidance, the breeding program had become a profitable enterprise in its own right. They sold horses to ranchers, the cavalry, stagecoach companies, and private buyers who came from as far away as California and Texas to purchase stock with the Callahan brand. Zara's role had evolved as well. After James was born, she had begun keeping the books for the business, discovering a talent for numbers that complemented Kieran's skill with the horses. Together, they made a formidable team, respected throughout the region for both their business acumen and their evident devotion to each other. The sound of an approaching wagon drew Zara's attention to the lane. It was her parents, coming for their weekly Sunday dinner, a tradition that had persisted through the years. George was driving, with Martha beside him, both of them looking remarkably well for their ages. "Grandma and Grandpa are here," Mary exclaimed, setting aside her embroidery and rushing down the porch steps, little George toddling after her as fast as his short legs would carry him. Zara followed more sedately, smiling as her parents climbed down from the wagon, immediately engulfed by their enthusiastic grandchildren. George scooped up his namesake, tossing the giggling toddler into the air, while Martha knelt to admire Mary's embroidery progress. "Where's that husband of yours?" George asked Zara after kissing her cheek in greeting. Zara nodded toward the training ring. "Teaching James the fine art of horse whispering. They've been at it all morning." Martha linked arms with her daughter as they walked toward the house. "And how are you feeling, my dear? Any better this week?" Zara patted her mother's hand reassuringly. "Much better. The morning sickness seems to be easing finally." Her fourth pregnancy had been more difficult than the previous three, with persistent nausea that had only recently begun to subside as she entered her fourth month. Kieran had been wonderfully supportive, taking on more of the household duties and ensuring she had time to rest each day. Inside the house, which had been expanded twice over the years to accommodate their growing family, Hannah, who had left the Marshall household to work for Zara and Kieran when James was born, was putting the finishing touches on Sunday dinner. The aroma of roast chicken, fresh bread, and apple pie filled the warm kitchen. "Everything smells wonderful, Hannah," Zara said, hanging her mother's bonnet on the hook by the door. "As always." Hannah, now in her 50s but still spry, beamed at the compliment. "Just about ready, Mrs. Callahan. The men folk can come in whenever they're done with those horses." Martha immediately went to the stove, checking on the vegetables despite Hannah's protests that everything was under control. It was a familiar Sunday ritual. Martha, unable to completely relinquish her role as the family's primary caretaker, Hannah tolerating the interference with good-natured resignation. Zara went to the window, watching as Kieran and James led the colt back to the paddock, her father joining them with little George perched on his shoulders. The sight of the 3 generations of men together brought a warmth to her heart that never diminished, no matter how many times she witnessed it. 10 years of marriage had only deepened her love for Kieran. The handsome cowboy who had pulled her from the flames had grown into a respected businessman, a devoted father, and a husband whose love was as steady and true as the day they'd wed. His dark hair now had threads of silver at the temples, and the lines around his eyes had deepened from years of working outdoors. But to Zara, he was more attractive than ever. Life hadn't always been easy. They'd weathered droughts that threatened the pastures, harsh winters that claimed valuable stock, and a scarlet fever outbreak that had nearly taken Mary when she was 3. Through it all, their partnership had remained unshakable, their love a foundation that supported them through every trial. As the men came in from outside, stamping their boots on the porch and washing up at the pump before entering the kitchen, Zara felt a familiar rush of gratitude for the life they had built together. She watched as Kieran helped James with the soap, patiently showing him how to get the dirt from under his fingernails, his face lit with pride in his son. Catching her eye through the window, Kieran smiled that same smile that had first captured her heart a decade ago. In it, Zara saw all the love and commitment that had characterized their years together, and the promise of many more to come. Dinner was a lively affair, as it always was when the whole family gathered. James regaled them with tales of his progress with the colt. Mary showed off her embroidery to general acclaim, and little George entertained everyone by attempting to feed bits of chicken to the family dog, Rusty, when he thought no one was looking. After the meal, while Hannah and Martha cleared the table, the men retired to the porch with pipes and coffee. Zara settled Mary and George for their afternoon naps, then joined the women in the kitchen to help with the dishes. "I saw Thomas Thornton in town last week," Martha commented as she dried a plate. He's back in Twin Pines, apparently, divorced from what I hear. Zara's hand stilled for just a moment in the dishwater before she resumed washing. Is that so? I hadn't heard. MMM. Eleanor left him for a banker in Denver, according to Mrs. Beaumont. Martha's tone suggested she found a certain poetic justice in this development. He's looking quite diminished, nothing like the dashing young man who courted you. That was a lifetime ago, Mama, Zara said, handing her another clean plate. I hardly even think about it anymore. It was true. The pain and humiliation of that day had faded so completely that it was like a story that had happened to someone else. Occasionally, she would look at her children, at the home and business she and Kieran had built together, and marvel at how close she had come to a very different life, a life that, she was certain, would have brought her far less joy. Well, I just thought you should know in case you encounter him in town, Martha said. He asked about you, apparently, whether you were happy. Zara smiled, glancing out the window where she could see Kieran on the porch, deep in conversation with her father and James, who had resisted his nap with 7-year-old determination. And what did you tell him? I told him you were the happiest woman in Montana territory, Martha replied with satisfaction, and that your husband is the finest horse breeder west of the Mississippi. Both true statements, Zara agreed, drying her hands on her apron. Later, after her parents had departed with promises to return the following Sunday, Zara and Kieran sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset as they had on their wedding night. The children were finally asleep, the house quiet except for the occasional creak of the wooden swing and the distant nickering of horses in the paddock. Mama said Thomas Thornton is back in town, Zara mentioned, her head resting comfortably on Kieran's shoulder. Divorced, apparently. Kieran's arm tightened slightly around her. Does that bother you? Not in the least, Zara assured him, tilting her face up to look at him. I was just thinking how grateful I am that he showed his true colors when he did. If he hadn't, I might never have met you. Kieran smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. I'd like to think we would have found each other somehow. Some things are just meant to be. Like us, Zara said softly. Exactly like us. Kieran placed his free hand gently on the slight swell of her belly where their fourth child was growing. And this little one, and whatever else life has in store for us. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky and the first stars began to appear, Kieran and Zara Callahan sat together on the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by the legacy of their love, their children, their business, their shared life. The path that had led them here had begun in flames and ashes, but what had grown from that fiery beginning was stronger and more beautiful than either of them could have imagined. In the peaceful Montana twilight, they watched the stars emerge, two souls bound together by love, faith, and the enduring promise of a future they would continue to build together, one day at a time.